Sassy Dooley.
She's up there.
Oh, here. Sorry, I was muted. And it's Dougleby, just FYI.
Thank you, ma'am. Chair Gwen Griffin.
Here.
Evan Loomis. Kathy Leaders.
Here.
Brad Morrison.
Here.
John Shannon.
Here.
Kirk Shireman.
Here.
Dr. Heather Wilson.
Here.
Sir, we have a quorum.
Okay, outstanding. Dr. Wilson, I see you on there now. All right, excellent. So thank you all for joining today. I really appreciate everyone's time and effort to be here and be part of this meeting. I guess the first thing we should do is congratulate Norm and thank you for joining and being our first executive director. So thank you so much and glad to have you here at this meeting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
So I know we have some ideas about filling out the organization. I guess by law we have to find a chief compliance officer and probably some other things to talk about, which we'll do in the meeting.
Yes, sir.
And then we also have a strategic plan subcommittee reporting here today. I do think, Dr. Wilson, I know you might have to step out, and Evan and I voted you as the person to talk about it today. So we may with everyone's permission, change the agenda here just a little bit in a few minutes, but we'll proceed and first hear about comments from Dr. Greg Bonin. So thank you so much, Dr. Bonin, for joining us. We really appreciate all the work you've done so far and the great relationship we've had together in the work that we've been doing so far. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate you joining us. I know you're busy doing important work there at the hospital in Houston. So thanks, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be with you guys. And I wanted to start by pointing out that this group has really already done a lot of work in a short period of time. It's just been literally a matter of weeks since you received your appointments and were stood up, and you've got an executive director, and you successfully navigated that. You've got your strategic plan subcommittee at work, and really I couldn't be more pleased with the progress and the level of engagement that it has been demonstrated by all of you, and that's a really good sign. I continue to be very active because this is something I feel is really of great importance to our state and to our country, and we have so much opportunity that's been set up through this initiative, but with the upcoming legislative session, it creates a couple of nice things. I think one is it gives us a timeline that we need to work with in terms of deliverables for the resources and the opportunity we've been given, but it also puts us in the position of thinking about the next 2 years after this, so really about 3 years into the future. And so I was going to briefly kind of lay that timeline out for you. And before I do that, and I won't take up too much of our time, I also want to point out that I've had an opportunity to visit a number of companies and a number of locations around the state, and we've had some really exciting brainstorming sessions, and the level of opportunity is actually greater than what I had anticipated, if you can believe that. So when we first started with this a couple of years ago, I knew it was important. I knew that there was a lot that we could do as a state and as a group. But as these conversations have taken place, I've realized that I had actually underestimated what could actually occur if we really are focused and engaged and invest in this area. So I would encourage you guys that to the extent that you have ideas or recommendations for things that the group or myself should look at, that please share those. And I look forward to having more site visits and more conversations about broadly speaking what we may do. And then of course in time you guys will drill down into the specific objectives and the prioritization of projects that we want to undertake. But really I couldn't be more excited about what I've learned in terms of what we may be able to do in the coming months and in the next few years. And I'm going to continue to work on this, very aggressively. So in terms of timeline, I just wanted to remind you, the legislature will be in session beginning in January. And so what that means is for a lot of state entities, agencies, for example, they've already prepared what their requests are going to look like, what their budget is going to look like for the next biennium. So that process is already beginning to take shape, and the bills that will be introduced, including the budgets that will be filed in the House and the Senate, will be under construction, if you will, this fall. And so what we're really looking at is literally within the next couple of months, trying to at least establish a basic framework of what a strategic plan would look like, and then some specific objectives that would be for both what you already have been given as resources, but then also being able to define what a future budget might look like based upon the specific projects and opportunities that are identified by this group for the subsequent biennium. And so I don't want to put too much pressure on you guys. You've been asked to do a lot in a short period of time, and now what I'm telling you is to do even more in a really short period of time. But I know that you're up to the task, and I think that this could turn out even better than what anyone had envisioned when we first put it together. So I just want to continue to encourage you. Thank you for the time, the energy, and all the effort that you're putting into it. And please, in this this season where we're looking at where the state should go, don't hesitate to mention ideas that you have, or people that we need to visit with, or locations that we should visit. And with that, I'll turn the meeting back over to you guys.
All right, thank you. Maybe I should ask the board here, any questions for Dr. Bonin while we have his attention?
I will add one other thing, and that is the opportunity from a national defense and security side is also something that I knew existed, but had perhaps underestimated the need and our ability to potentially help address some real concerns that exist for the United States as we think about how we project into the future and help lead to protect the free world and and the freedoms that we have. And when you think about what's happening in space, it's really exploding in terms of the ability to get there, and that can be a very good thing, but it has to be protected so that everybody can get there safely. And there are not a lot of rules, if you will. It's the things that we're accustomed to in terms of law or treaties that are earthbound don't necessarily exist. And so that makes it even more critical that we're able to lead in that arena, so that it's a place where private companies and countries that go there and individuals that go there in good faith are able to do that and have the opportunity to learn and to research and to make life better for people on Earth. So I did want to point out that that's another area that seems to be of even greater possibility than what I had originally anticipated.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and the comments, Dr. Bonin. We look very much forward to working closely with you, over the coming weeks and I was going to say months, but weeks and month before we need to have a draft anyway of our strategic plan and start working on the budget. We know time is short. I can tell you that we're committed to working this and coming forward with a good plan for you. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's do one other order of business and here quickly, and then maybe we'll change the order of the agenda just a bit. So we need to consider the approval of the minutes from the June 14th meeting. I think members here have a draft of those minutes. Do you have any questions or discussions about the minutes? Any comments about the minutes? Okay. Hearing no comments, can we have a motion to approve the minutes from the June 14th meeting? Okay, John moved to approve. How about a second?
Second.
Nancy seconded. So all in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, very well. The minutes are approved. I would propose at this point, because I know Dr. Wilson has another commitment here shortly, and she's instrumental in one of our subcommittees. So what I would propose is we jump to agenda item number 6.
7B.
7. Oh, I jumped. Oh, it's right. It's you and Mark for Joseph. Yeah, 7 subcommittee updates. And what I would propose here, we just do, we talk about the strategic plan item here, and then we'll come back and do the rest of the subcommittee. So if that's all right, any objection from the board here? Okay, so the strategic planning subcommittee has been formed and been working quite a bit. So Dr. Wilson, can I hand the baton to you to provide a summary of where we are with the strategic plan?
Thank you, sir. So we all nominated Evan Loomis to do this report, and then he squirreled out on us. He had a conflict, so I'm your substitute. The committee has met several times, and we've also begun work on a joint document, kind of a draft. As is always the difficulty with these things, it's the hardest part to decide what not to do, or the sequence in which to prioritize strategies in order to have impact. In addition to the front end kind of describing the environment within which we find ourselves and the opportunity, the committee did look at 4 goals. And I would say we are in draft at this point. And so while this is starting to come together, I would say it's still soft jello. And the hard part is, of course, going to be to refine it and give ourselves something useful to look ahead, not 15 years, but look ahead maybe 3 to 5 years on the most important things to get done. We gave ourselves 4 goals. They may not be exactly right yet, but I'll at least describe what they are. The goal 1 was attract and grow innovative space companies. Pretty straightforward. That's what we're going to do. Then you develop strategies to achieve those goals that the Texas Space Commission might put into its plan and its activities. As a couple of examples, create enabling infrastructure. So, for example, are there needed capital equipment that would attract companies to be in Texas that it's hard to find elsewhere? As an example, whether that's thermal chambers or vacuum chambers or wind tunnels or whatever, what would those things be? What are the sticky things that would help companies? As another example of a strategy, deepen and share market knowledge. So comprehensive interactive databases of associated analytical and visualization tools about supply chains and space companies that would enable all of the Texas economic development entities to really focus and enable their recruitment efforts. Is that a high leverage strategy or not for the Space Commission to provide? In other words, how do we do enabling things for a very large economic development infrastructure out there? So those are a couple of examples. Goal 2 is to advance discovery and conduct high value space related research. This is actually in the driven by the underlying statute. There are a lot of different potential strategies here to achieve that goal. I think we really as a board and as a subcommittee need to look at what are the most high leverage strategies. Space research seed funding may be one that would require, competitively awarded grants to conduct research and activities in preparation for large externally funded research proposals. Research enhancement grants, so augment funding that's competitively earned from NASA or NSF or other places related to space so that you increase what we're doing here in Texas. SBIR and STTR matching funds. Those kinds of strategies, as well as potentially competitively awarded research grants to Texas universities or associated companies or even government entities to advance discovery and its application related to space. So that requires a lot more infrastructure than matching grants. And so thinking about what really gives us high leverage there. The third goal was understand and attract and retain important federal space missions. Texas has a lot of those. Obviously, NASA is the biggest one, but how are we going to engage national entities and then pursue federal missions? How do we position ourselves long term? There's a couple of strategies there, of course, on engagement and then pursuing federal missions. When there's a basing decision, how do we position ourselves to be in really competitive territory for those potential missions to locate here, whether they're NOAA or DoD or Space Force or NASA or whatever. One of the items that in there was a strategy long-term, very long-term strategy, is provide Texas Space Force scholarships. So the Space Force wants to be the most highly educated of the Defense Department services. You don't have to worry about paying a stipend for those officers, but if they went to a Texas university, can we get an MOU with the Space Force that up to X officers a year chosen by the Space Force would be given full tuition and mandatory fees at any Texas university, as an example. So those kinds of partnerships. The final goal that we have articulated at this point is to ensure a favorable regulatory environment. So can we, review state regulatory requirements? Can we develop a partnership with the FAA, as an example, so that we ensure that Texas is the preferred location for safe, flexible, responsive space launch? And what would that look like? Supply chain issues might be addressed there. And one of the ones that just came up recently was on a regulatory environment is reciprocity for state licensure. So when Defense Department entities are making basing decisions, those operational issues are primary, but family satisfaction in those basing decisions matters more than you might think. And 30% of professions now require licensure, everything from barbers to nurses. That legislation on reciprocity for licensure may be another added advantage, that we get that through now, and when some major basing decision comes along, it's yet one more reason to choose Texas. So those are the biggest challenge for all of us will be, all right, how do we align the budget with this, and how do we decide what we're just not going to do now? I think all of us can see the one employee of the Texas Space Commission on our screens here. This is we want to. We know that this is a startup. What are the most important things to do in year 1, 2, 3, even if long-term we know there are other strategies? And every strategy should be high leverage toward those goals. Mr. Chairman, I think that's probably the summary of where we are.
That's an outstanding summary, so thanks very much. Gosh, I guess we'll ask for brief questions. I realize we could talk about this for hours. So I think there'll be a product here coming forward that the full board will be able to review.
Timeline? What's the timeline for pulling it together? Where do you expect to be in a month or so?
Good question, sir. We've got a joint document we're working on. I actually think it might be beneficial if other board members were given access to that document on Google Docs to just start to comment, and we can do that asynchronously, I think. I don't know whether the lawyer, I can't see whether he's squinting or grimacing, if that's okay.
We'll make sure it's done.
He's not frowning.
The second question was, do you need help? Because that's a massive
yes.
pile of work, right? And you've got a lot of people with a lot of
It
experience
is.
on the board.
And there's
Who would be interested to help?
Yeah, I think, so I agree with Dr. Wilson. I think it would be great to we'll work with Joseph then to make it available. I think Norman was going to make some additions based on our last meeting last week. Friday, so just a few days ago.
Yeah.
But and so maybe right after that, we'll talk, and it might be then ready to go get a little wider distribution and look, and then obviously we'll work about making sure we're following all the.
Sounds like
all
you're
the
ready.
rules.
You're to a point where you could get a little
Sure. Norman just came in and we kind of briefed him on Friday, and we made some edits and things like that, and continue to do that. We are using Google Docs, which is really a pretty good free tool. At some point in time, we're probably going to need a little more configuration management than what we're doing now, but so far it's been great, and like Dr. Wilson said, the asynchronicity of that has been really useful too, because not everyone has time at the same time. So
Separate from, if I may, separate from the actual document, this is the right platform and setting with everybody in an open meeting to offer additional comments for the group as fodder, in addition to what we will, of course, continue to iterate on in version control of this shared document. So anybody else have thoughts or questions or prompts for me to take as an action officer role now would be useful, because right now it's just been the subcommittee who has been part of this thought process, to Dr. Wilson's point previous.
I think the only input I would have, Kirk and Heather, is that, when we look at space infrastructure, it can be basic infrastructure that's just as important, right? And I'm just talking about roads and warehouse. I mean, they're in the right kinds of things to be able to process large pieces of hardware. So just as you're thinking about infrastructure, I know we would tend to go to vacuum chambers and things like that are also important, but that's an end goal product there may be other things that are important too, just so if we would
absolutely, Catherine. In fact,
it's broadly, I think that would be really, really good. I think that infrastructure is really important.
In fact,
companies.
I didn't mention it, but as a subtick of one of those strategies on enabling infrastructure, it does include space infrastructure grants, and spaceport grants were rolled in under us in the legislation. The way it reads right now is work creatively with Texas counties, cities, and spaceport authorities to provide competitive grants to attract, maintain, or develop infrastructure for federal and private space-related missions.
And we've talked about, Kathy, in numerous of those goals too, about leveraging other people's money.
Yeah.
So when you talk about roads and power grids and all, frankly, schools, all those things that we need, it's not necessarily going to be in the Texas Space Commission's budget. We would want to go work with other state agencies and spend their money as much as we can.
Hey, two things I thought on this. First on the infrastructure, right? JSC has, there's a lot of capabilities in the state that I don't know about, right? And I imagine most people on the board don't really know about. So maybe some discussion in the future where we could have somebody come and brief us kind of what exists right now, right? Because there are a lot of disparate things out in the state that have been going on with spaceports and all kinds of other stuff. At A&M, at UT,
At UT El Paso as well. So
what we discovered in talking about the Texas A&M Space Institute facility and our meetings that we had on that is there's not currently a roadmap for what exists in the state, and I think that's a good action.
Right.
I don't know if the board can take that action or how we can enable that, but to utilize the existing resources that we have today and just find out what is that map. I will tell you that at least our research has shown we don't have that map today.
So it might, excuse me, that might be a really good opportunity for TARSEC to engage with us. Maybe we work collectively to, create a mutual charter where they kind of help us with that roadmap and kind of paint the picture of what are all the resources, assets around the state.
I had a second one too, is in Dr. Wilson brought it up and my brain exploded, right? We have a lot of NASA experience on this board, right? And there's some like Dr. Wilson, and others that have some other experience outside of NASA. But she talked about NOAA, she talked about DOD, Space Force specifically, and the federal space missions that we see potentially coming up that Texas should be a part of. I am unfamiliar with most of those things, right? In the DOD and the NOAA, right? And so if we could get some kind of a briefing set up or something where we could understand better what the future of those different federal organizations are, I think would be really helpful as well.
Yeah, great. I think that would be a great action. And if I could pile on to your action, we've already come across a number of, I'll say, space companies who are looking to relocate, perhaps even international space companies looking to come relocate. And there might be a list of those that are happening too, in terms of, think of it as the target, the target environment or the playing field. So it'd be great, I think, both from a national security areas we might consider going after together with local entities and then companies as well. So yeah.
Kirk, to your point, and John, I know Air Force Association, Space Force Association has some meetings coming up out on the East Coast. That might be a good place to be informed as such as well. So, Norman, I think there was a prompt there for you on that. So.
Roger. Yes, sir.
Just basic foundational stuff we need to do as a group, right? And some of it is just what is going on in Texas, right? And really understand that well, and start to figure out how it all plays together, because that has never been done before, right? It's always been local entities doing things. Right?
But not only Texas itself, but what's in play nationally, or maybe even broader than that we could go, that could be in Texas. Those missions, federal missions, they might not even be thinking Texas right now, but it would be great for us to go find out who's considering a move, and how do we convince them that Texas would be a great place to be.
Yeah, you would think there'd be a lobbying effort down the road, right? That would be important.
Well, here's our lobbyist.
We're not going to use that word. I think we're going to.
What other word to call it?
I think we're going to use the word speaker series here for a while, and we're going to use all of y'all actually as some of the voices and faces to help spread that message here soon. We've already begun to get a lot of requests for the Space Commission, which is certainly not just me; it's all of you all to make some appearances. So your calendars will start to get full here pretty quick.
Great. It's going to be it's a busy time for a professional community of one. So yeah, we're all here to help, but certainly puts more emphasis on filling out the organization, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yes, sir.
Great comments. I think we captured the actions. I don't know that we was. I personally like to put assignees, actionees, and dates, but maybe we ought to at least just capture the actions now.
Got it.
And because some of them may not be this commission's, maybe they might be TARSEC's or something. So if we could do that, and maybe in the minutes, I don't know what's appropriate, but perhaps in the minutes we could talk about actionees and rough dates for when we might try to accomplish.
Mr. Chairman, I also took some notes. I'll try to add some of these ideas into the draft, and then I think it's important to get this draft to everybody else to so that people can see, massage, make recommendations, so that we can start to drive it to completion.
And can you summarize the schedule piece again? What are the targets? Just because I know we're going to be lining up meetings and stuff, just so that we kind of understand.
I think we should get this draft link to everyone within a week. But I think we need to start finalizing this. Even, it's okay for a strategy not to be perfect. If it's a real strategy, it's going to iterate. But I think we need in about a month to have at least something to go on, because I think we've got to execute some current year things and set a budget to that, and we've got to start talking to key leaders on what comes next.
I recall from a previous meeting that we talked about August being the month where we're really working together to get that draft in place, so that in September we're beginning to look at we're able to utilize, to align with the draft of the strategic plan as we begin to look at working toward the January session and wrapping up the year. I recall that from a previous meeting. And I think we're right on track there, thanks to the subcommittee.
Why don't we
But
take?
I do think the 4 goals you have can be overarching, and the subtask could change as we evolve, right? I think that's what's very strong about the structure you guys kind of established, because we actually could have different subtasks that could evolve as the commission's role evolves.
And to his credit, Evan really helped on the overarching language, which I didn't really talk about. But we set out a mission to make Texas a global leader in civil, commercial, and military space activities by promoting innovation, advancing space exploration, and creating space-related jobs. Our goal is to build a strong space industry that drives technology, attracts top talent, and boosts the state's economy. Well, that was pretty good. Not bad for an entrepreneur guy. No, Evan did a good job, and then we've done a lot of ideating. But again, the hardest part is going to be decide what we're not going to do or how we're going to sequence things, and that's we could really use some help there.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I would propose then when I think, Norman, you were going to make some comments to that document, and maybe at the very beginning we can kind of highlight the schedule in that document so that folks, when they get the link, they can see what the schedule is. And then, of course, as we staff it here in the open meeting, in future open meetings, we'll track to that schedule.
Copy that. Yes, sir.
That way everybody has the same
Cadence.
same cadence or the same idea of when things might be, when we need to drive it to closure. Or closure is probably even the wrong term here, but
We do have a delivery date.
Sufficient closure to do our job, to feed the state budget process.
Yep.
That's really our goal. We can always update the plan, and probably should,
Yes,
on a
sir.
regular basis anyway.
Perfect. Thank you.
Other discussion before we close this out? How about online? I know we kind of dominated things here in the room. Anyone else on the net here?
I'll just say, go ahead, Sassy.
I was going to say, I think it was really great work. I mean, it's such a hard task to take. I mean, we've got a massive amount to do. So thank you to the subcommittee for driving this forward.
And I think the expertise and the diversity of expertise on the subcommittee is really playing well into where we're going. And I greatly appreciate the weekly work that you guys, if not daily work, you've been doing on this today.
All right, thank you all very much. So let's,
You want to stick with the subcommittee? Just go straight to.
we can, yeah, if we're on subcommittee, we can finish it out, that's fine. So why don't we go back to, and thank you for your allowing us to go swap the order here a little bit, but we can go back to part A of this, which is the hiring subcommittee. So I guess we're looking at hiring the statutory for required personnel. Of course, we need a chief compliance officer, and I know Norman, you had some ideas about what should be done for the organization as a whole. So Brad, I think you had a status here for us.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Kirk. Norman, might you update us first on kind of your work as far as building out your staff, and then we'll talk more about the chief compliance officer.
Happily, there's a segue for sure, but we've got 4 job postings out currently, including the chief compliance officer that had already been posted well before I came on board. I understand that there was probably around a dozen or 10 applications that came in. There were down select of 3, and I won't steal your thunder on that role. But moving forward, we also have a deputy executive director posting out. We've got a dozen applications in for that are pending HR screening. An executive assistant, 11 applications have been received, also pending HR screening, and a chief or director of communications, 9 applications have been received, also pending HR screening. So hopefully we'll get those by sometime next week and get some interviews scheduled moving forward. In addition, we've got plans for a grant specialist, a research specialist, some help with the financial analyst side once we start talking about grant award processes. That's another topic of the agenda here, so I won't get too ahead of the game in terms of the agenda, but once we get that process established, we'll have a bigger build out of the team for helping us process those applications as well. So ideally in the next 2 weeks, we've got another 4 or 5 faces up on the 8th floor in this building, and perhaps by the end of the month or early into August, we've got another 3 or 4 to join the team. I've got a couple of chairs and a couple of desks that are anxious for some bodies as some teammates. So that's in terms of staff. I'll pause for reaction or any questions on that.
I have one question here. So I understand it's the board's responsibility for the compliance
Yes,
officer,
sir.
I believe. These other positions, though, are really in your purview. Do you need assistance, or is the subcommittee assisting you in the hiring of those, in the screening and hiring? Or do you need anything from us relative to those other positions?
Currently, no, but I have at least visited with the chair on all of these before they were posted. So keeping her in the loop, and we'll move out. I'll report out rather when we start to have interviews scheduled, and if we need to involve or if anybody's interested, we can involve them at that time. But I'm waiting for HR to give me the clearance to actually schedule the interviews. So we've got the jobs posted, and then we'll take the next step at that time, sir.
Excellent. Other questions? Okay.
Yeah, so as you guys have probably heard, Norm, thanks again. You know, he's jumping right in. His start date was July 1. We're here at July 17, so thank you for what you've already done for us, and you can kind of see the good work he's already doing. In addition to the hiring of Norm, we also, as a subcommittee, Dr. Nancy Curry-Gregg and John Shannon, we were tasked to screen, interview, and recommend to the board a chief compliance officer that would remain independent of our executive director and report directly to the board of directors. The good news is HR was able to source to us 12 candidates. We independently assessed each of those. We selected the top 3 that all 3 of us could agree upon, and we conducted 3 interviews, about an hour long each. Again, round robin question format. We asked each candidate the same set of questions, a total of 6. We also offered them an opportunity to provide questions to us, and the good news is we have narrowed it down to 3 candidates. We'd like to move into an executive session to discuss those 3 in our recommendation to the board. And I'm not certain if we do that at this moment and juncture, or if we save that for sometime later down the meeting. But that's kind of a quick update, Kirk, as to the subcommittee. So we continue to do good work. I do appreciate the support from my 2 colleagues here, and I think we're doing really good. And Norm, again, thank you for all your support on that.
Thanks, sir. I think we can continue if that's okay with you, sir, and then we'll go into executive session at the end.
Yeah, I think that's unless some people object, I think it's great. We have a lot of other attendees we'll have to invite to step out if we do that now, so we can do the other open items and then come back and do the executive session, and then we'll come back to open and close the meeting. Is that, Joseph, are we following the rules if we do that?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I think that takes us now to executive director remarks.
Sure, thank you.
So thanks. So you've been on board here, the day's the 17th, so for 17 days, including weekends. So and weekends and holidays. So how are things going? Please, the floor is yours.
Sure, going very well. Just for the sake of the room and those online, as a reminder, y'all made the decision before I came on board, which, by the way, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for giving me this honor, but we're located up on the 8th floor of this building. We're in the TxDOT headquarters building downtown Austin, the Greer building. And so TxDOT could not be more hospitable to us. I want to start by saying thank you to them and their staff, especially for the use of this room and all of their resources in particular. But I've done my darndest to meet with all of the support staff also within the Office of the Governor, who have been more than helpful to us, in addition to those who you've already been engaged with over the last several months. There's been a lot of others who I've been interacting with, of which includes the CFO, Ms. Terry Bullen, who's here, and one of the items on the agenda here for me to cover is a quick rundown on the numbers. And so she and I talked through that, and as a reminder, $150 million that was appropriated by the legislature to the fund. In November of last year, it was put into an investment account, and it has already earned over $5 million. So well into still the black side of the column in the ledger, if you will, for budget purposes. The Texas Space Commission is very healthy at the moment. An estimated budget has been created for the remainder of this FY that ends just in about a month, and then through the upcoming FY25 that begins September 1. Terry and I will have a much more specific budget for the board, probably come October when we meet then, because there has been a limited amount of expenses drawn from that total account over the last several months. So all to say, it's still very healthy in terms of the budget. Any questions on that before I continue to run through a couple of other items? If you got really hard questions, Terry's in the room too.
Well, if you keep earning money rather than spending it, you're probably not gonna get a lot of questions.
Well, if I have to guess, there's a bunch of folks out there that are anxious for an application to submit to try to draw some funds out of there. So
I suspect so.
the next thing I want to mention is there have been lots of meeting requests. I've done my best to accommodate all those who have come in just these last couple of weeks, and those that are also scheduled forthcoming. And I'm just going to go down the list primarily for others in the room and online to be aware, and of course you all as well. But they include Acme, Axiom, BAHEP, Business Executives for National Security, Capital Factory, DIU, of course the Governor's Commission for Military Preparedness through the DIAG program, the Houston Airport System, Intuitive Machines, NASA JSC, the NASA STEM Office with the Space Grant Program up in DC, of course the Governor's Office Budget and Policy, in particular the tax policy folks, Opportunity Austin, Space Force Association, SpaceX, the Texas Israel Alliance, Texas A&M, UT Austin, Texas Public Policy Foundation, Texas Workforce Commission, Texas 2036, TxDOT, and the U.S. Space Force, 16th Air Force out of San Antonio as well. Those have all been engagements either in person or virtual that I have completed, and those underway, or those that are upcoming rather, include Aegis Aerospace, Audubon Texas, BioNTX, Greater Houston Partnership, NSIC, Plug and Play, Space Center Houston, Space Foundation, Star Lab, Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio, and Y Texas as well. So lots of folks are anxious to understand what it is that y'all have charged me with thus far, as well as how they can continue to be engaged. Just for the record and your situational awareness, they are most anxious to know when an application might hit the streets and what those metrics might be to apply for funds out of that healthy $150+ million account. So otherwise, I just wanted to share with you that there's a number of site visits that I've been invited to participate alongside with Dr. Bonin, and those that are still forthcoming, and also making some headway on updating the website, space.texas.gov, and of course the ongoing engagements with the subcommittees. So all to say, lots underway and very exciting nonetheless. So thank you again for this opportunity. Happy to answer any questions. Sorry for the quick ramble.
Talked about an email for everybody.
Those are underway as well. Yes, sir. Everyone, each of you will have first name dot last name at space.texas.gov email address. IT is going as quick as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, of course, we need the email address and then how in the world to go read the email.
Yes, sir.
So
You gotta buy a new phone.
Yeah.
All right.
Or we could just have email addresses and never read them, I don't
Is
know.
that Lockheed Fireball?
Yeah. Anyway, thanks very much. That'll be great, and great work. I started trying to write down all those companies and I quit. I didn't make it through the A's.
Got a list.
So yeah, I'd love to have I'll take a snapshot of the list anyway. Make sure my notes are complete. But
Oh, I'm sorry.
you've been very busy, so thanks very much.
Yes, sir.
Just a question, so when we get those requests, we should have something we can send them, right? Hey, the Space Commission this is what we're all about, you know, we'll have some discussion on what the legislative requirements are, where we are in forming up. Just have some kind of an information package we send to them, or are we gonna?
Thus, the importance of trying to find a communications director as quickly as possible. But yes, sir, I'm doing my best to convey all of this verbally and follow up in writing on emails, but it's my goal to get that position filled very, very soon. So once that happens, we'll move out to have that full package of resources available, print, online, etc. And that might be a good segue, I think, to the next topic, sir.
It's been 17 days, I mean. Thanks.
I did order coffee this morning for everybody.
And you were blessed with that, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's see, our next, any other questions or comments before we move to the next topic?
I agree with that more.
Thank you.
Just a quick note on one of the first things y'all did were the conflict of interest and code of conduct rules.
Yep.
And those have been posted for the 30-day required period, and we're in the process of getting the adoption document worked up. So y'all's first action will be in its final completion here in 20 days after we get those rules adopted.
Okay. All right, thank you. So hearing no other comments, let's go to topic number 6, which is the seal of the Texas Space Commission. So as we know, the legislation directs us to adopt and use an official seal for the Texas Space Commission. We need to talk about this requirement. I guess there's a number of ways we can accomplish this. I'm sure people have ideas about how to do this and perhaps get public comment as well. Of course, there's also, I guess, conceivably procurement. I know there are entities out there that do these kinds of branding things already. I'm actually not certain what other state departments have done in the past. I guess what we'd like to do is talk about how we should proceed with this. So, Norman, maybe I could hand the baton to you first and talk about your thoughts, and we'll let board members chime in with questions, comments, ideas, or volunteering to actually draw it themselves.
That'd be helpful. I'll start, certainly. The chair and I have had a couple of conversations alongside Joseph as well, but there's everything on the table literally in terms of putting a procurement out on the street for external folks to help come up with some design mock-ups for the commission to review. As a reminder, following state law, there are timelines that are affiliated with that could potentially be longer than y'all might be interested in allowing the calendar to tick.
You mean timelines in following the procurement process?
Correct.
Or
yes,
timelines to actually baseline a seal?
Nope. So to put it out on the street and then to get the options back and all that good stuff. So we can get into detail on a more legalese discussion later if that's the direction that the board would like to go. Other state agencies, to your point, have done public competitions that involve school kids, involve college, university students as well. There's also the option for partnering through TARSEC to actually get time donated by different organizations, including nonprofits per se, to make recommendations or submit suggestions to the board for consideration as the seal. The seal then likely could drive the rest of the marketing campaign in terms of a communication strategy and potential additional one-pagers and other material that Mr. Shannon was referring to as well. So I'll pause there, and Ms. Griffin might have some additional comments to share, but we do have options. For the record, we wanted to make sure that the public knows that this is on the Commission's to-do list, and looking for some input from the board members here on which direction they'd like staff to pursue in terms of identifying the course of action and path of least resistance.
If I could jump in real fast in this discussion, if you have ideas of companies that could help and that kind of thing, it could actually hurt their position in procurement if we start discussing them here. And so general ideas are the best approach for procurement purposes.
Gwen, do you have ideas or comments you'd like to make?
As Norman mentioned, we have chatted about this a bit. I do know there's interest from some agencies that would like to submit proposals. It's a little too early to do that. Personally, I love the idea of tapping into our future talent in Texas. I believe that, there's a job for everyone in the space industry. I'm an example of that with a communications background. And so I know we have to, timing is going to be critical to that, but there are some organizations that we could work with statewide to, and as Norman said, whether it's the K through 12 or university level, graphic design students, that sort of thing. So I like that approach, not making that as a formal recommendation, but what better way to engage our future workforce in ownership, if you will, of what we're doing. So I like that idea. I also know there are a number, as Norman mentioned, a number of entities that are willing to provide graphic services pro bono. I always look forward to that as long as we go that route properly as well. So we'll look to council on that guidance. So I again, love other ideas that some of you may have had in engaging the public in this sort of branding.
Other comments, thoughts?
I also really like the public engagement perspective, especially from a STEAM perspective. We talk about STEM a lot, it's STEAM. And I'm not sure I constrain it to just K through 12 or just university. I think I'd open it globally. But I think public engagement, and it would also help with public acknowledgement that this new entity exists, and involve a wider audience.
Remember, we did that for the space shuttle program when we decided to build a new program logo, and we got inputs that we never would have expected from a lot of different places. They were terrific.
And that's a great
People
part
were excited.
Yeah, it generates excitement, it generates interest, and it helps us to get the word out about this new endeavor.
There is a little cautionary tale, which I'm sure we could manage, but the International Space Station program did this. Kathy probably was heavily involved in it, but we're going to name a module, and a national comedian got a hold of it and stuffed the ballot box. So getting input for, but voting are two different things, and we ended up not naming he wanted to name it after himself. We ended up naming a treadmill after him. We should have named the toilet after him. We named
Which actually was really good.
I thought it was
for
good.
the ISS.
It was.
Fun. It was a fun thing to do. Well,
It was not the module, but what
what
NASA did as a result was really good. Yeah.
Well, what we did
Hey,
shuttle,
we got a lot of free press out of that.
Yeah.
So that was a great example, actually. It's just, you have to leave yourself an option that we're probably not going to, it'll give us ideas, but I do agree with what Nancy and Gwen was saying. I mean, I think I've, just in my career, and Kirk, this with the commercial crew calendars, I was just blown away with what kids would show up with. And it's, you can take that and give it to a graphic artist, and, you've got this great integrated product.
What's the timeline that we're dealing with to try to get this done?
So there is no requirement other than we do it. Of course, it would be sooner rather than later as a recommendation. Ideally, if I had a strong recommendation, I would encourage this to be ready in time for the strategic plan's delivery. That date does there is a real date for that of December 1st. And through a couple of iterations over the next couple of months of both the strategic plan and perhaps the development of a seal and the rest of the communications plan, perhaps it can also go through an ideation process monthly, perhaps with the goal of getting it concluded by before Thanksgiving, but sooner.
Okay, thanks.
John, you had.
And if we like the idea of going with a public type of engagement, I would be happy to create a brief work back schedule just of how we might get there and how we could go about this and putting it out there if that's appropriate.
You can let people vote, and it's fun, right?
Yeah.
But you just have to be able to tolerate whatever, so you give them 5 choices, right, to vote on. All of which are acceptable.
The menu. You manage the menu, not
manage the menu, not the selection. Yes.
Okay, great. And there was one comment that was made in the discussion, Joseph, if I could ask you. Certainly I understand, well, I don't understand the state procurement process, but sure, there are people who do, and they'll keep us in line.
Yes.
I am familiar with the federal government procurement process, but there was a mention of a pro bono. If someone was to provide something pro bono, does that mean, the question is, does it still have to go through the procurement process, or would that be exo procurement process?
It depends on the pro bono, depends on what's being provided. We can only accept pro bono what we could legally purchase, right? And so there are certain requirements we have to procure certain items. Seal is one of them, and so we have to make sure that we can legally accept it. So, broad answer: yes, we can accept things pro bono. More specific answer is there are some fine points to it that it's not as easy as just saying, hey, thanks. And broadly speaking, with all these ideas, and I've never participated in like a public campaign, and so I'm gonna chase down kind of what that looks like to make sure that we have everything in place to make sure that we can do that. And procurement generally will make sure we're following the laws.
Okay, just one quick follow-up on this one. In the federal process, the folks are really worried about appropriation augmentation. And so pro bono is a really hard thing to do federally because it's looked at augmenting a particular agencies. So there's no state equivalent of concern with.
That's not a concern I've come across before. I certainly can confirm.
Okay.
But no, it's not you're saying essentially kind of growing a budget because money's fungible. We're growing a
Yeah, there's a better term than what I'm using. Probably not using the appropriate legal term, but essentially it's augmenting the appropriations, and
Interesting. Okay.
so it's pretty, even from one federal agency to another is cautionary.
Yeah.
So it's got to be. There's a lot of work involved in doing that. Anyway, that's what I was asking. I'm sorry, Brad. You had a question?
Yeah, just 2 points. I think it's appropriate since we're here at TxDOT and they own the Don't Mess with Texas brand. I think it's kind of interesting that we have an opportunity as an agency to do something kind of unique. Space is edgy, and so I would just remind us that other agencies have done pretty well in this regard, and so we owe it to ourselves to take a deliberate kind of time. The second thing, I think it's very strategic, no pun intended. The strategic plan might actually be needed first to allow us to inform what that brand becomes, or some aspect of tying our messaging to that strategic plan. I think owning very directly the brand we want to take out to the market is super important and super critical. So however we do that, I'm open-minded, but I think the strategic plan is a big part of whatever brand initiative that we have, and matching those up and owning those words could be a pretty important thing.
Is the legislative requirement on the seal, not necessarily? So I guess I'm wondering on the.
Correct.
So I'm wondering about the Don't Mess with Texas.
Well, that's not on the seal.
That's really in the community. Well, I'll call it branding.
Sure.
Right. So that's okay.
Separate.
It's a campaign,
There's no
and
reason why it
I'd
couldn't
say
be the
that's a
same, but-
campaign. We are in the statute required to create the seal for the Texas Space Commission.
Different from our brand.
Not necessarily, I would think, maybe, but
Interesting.
that's a great opportunity, right? So I was just curious, that's why I was asking. Okay, other questions or comments?
We'll gather the input or the responses back to some of these comments and share it with
Yeah,
everybody.
I think there seemed to be a lot of energy about
Public process.
yeah, how to engage the public in this, and so I don't know, I guess we can issue a UN action, can't we do that?
Yes, sir.
To basically take the input here and come back with a proposal, or 2 or 3 proposals, a limited set of proposals for us to consider for that, if that's okay.
Roger that.
And I guess we'd propose doing that. Here I'm taking Gwen's job.
You're the chair
next
today.
time, yeah. Well, I have the pen. I might as well go with it
Yep.
at our next meeting. And anyway, if that's a reasonable amount of time, if it's not, we can talk about extension. But it would be great to have a couple of ideas about how we might proceed that
Yes,
the
sir.
board could then act upon.
Will do.
Thank you.
Easy.
Okay, let's see. We did subcommittee
Number 8.
action, so we're now on number 8. The idea here is to discuss potential creation of the subcommittee. We're talking about the creation of a funding review subcommittee. We all know the commission can help Texas grow. I mean, we talked about that from the very beginning, of course. Dr. Bonas talked about it. We talked about the strategic plan. And we need to move forward on a number of fronts. Grant making is one, process and procedures. So we'd like to discuss the creation of a funding review subcommittee. Of course, it does not include a quorum, so I think we're limited to 3. Is that right?
3 is
That's the
right.
magic number, 3. It would be instrumental in helping guide the staff, the board and the staff on this process, including the structure, administrative help, etc. So I guess the question for the board of directors is to consider it's necessary to create a new subcommittee about grant making, and if so, what duties and tasks should they have? And maybe Gwen, if I could pause here and throw the baton to you for comments on this. I know you've been working this before.
Absolutely, and Norman jump in here as well. As we've all been made aware, a number of people are saying, when will the application or the form be available for us to submit a proposal? So this is a really important element in my mind that must align, obviously, with our strategic plan. But the idea would be that we go ahead and stand up a subcommittee now of individuals that are willing to work through with staff and council what those forms may look like, what that process for application looks like, while we're working in parallel path with the strategic plan the draft of the strategic plan. Because obviously we know we need to move quickly, yet methodically and thoroughly, and how we're going to begin to look at a portion of that $150 million to start, and then our go forward path. So as we've stood up the other subcommittees, this would be a group that would begin to really focus on this with staff, which right now is Norman, but we hope that changes quickly. And I see Heather has her hand up, so I'll defer to Heather.
Thank you, Gwen. The one thing I would say is that it strikes me that as a board, we need to, if we have strategies, we need to decide what the budget is. And the application for a grant, for a research matching grant, is not going to be the same as it is for, infrastructure, for water, for Boca Chica. So it strikes me that one of the first things we're going to need to do as a board is to try to set some general budget targets of how much money we're going to set aside for different strategies. Maybe the grant application is a common grant application in year one, irrespective of the strategy. But what you're going to need to evaluate research will be quite different from what you need to evaluate infrastructure.
Just on my tag ups with Norman along those lines, Heather, we've talked about we've got for-profit organizations, corporations, and nonprofit organizations, and I believe that you guys brought that up on the strategic plan committee. So it really would be to go ahead and stand up the subcommittee to dig into those. Let's do a list of things we need to be thinking about as we move toward process roles and responsibilities.
I have a question on scope. So we're talking about the $150 million for the Aerospace Research Fund. We're not talking about funding of the commission. Is that right?
We're talking about
Or both?
Nope, it's the fund that the commission oversees, and also TARSEC has the opportunity to make recommendations to the commission board for decisions on. And this subcommittee could coalesce to organize processes, like Gwen just said, and then eventually there will be metrics that would be adopted by the board, and then an application issued for the public to submit, similar to the process that has been underway for CHIPS as well.
Okay. I was just wondering if we already have kind of the ground rules of how the commission interfaces with TARSEC and the roles and responsibilities.
No, we don't.
And I wonder if we need that first before we start to strategize in terms of procedures and processes for the fund.
I can help with those two trains moving, especially since the next topic on the agenda is to talk about TARSEC in particular as well, but your point's well taken.
But not all of those, as I understand it anyway, not all of that 150 million is necessarily for research. Some of it will be. And we've all got communities that are asking us, how is this going to work? Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Dr. Wilson, that we are already, I've had a number of calls and emails. I know that Norman has as well. Everything from companies to research organizations to, nonprofits saying, how do I apply? So, or how are you going to manage this? So indeed, we'll talk about TARSEC here next. And the other component to this that I would love to see a subcommittee begin to really look at is how are we also going to, and some of this lives in the strategic plan, but how are we going to work with other state agencies, whether it be the Economic Development Office, I see Joe McCruder in the room, whether it's TxDOT or another organization. Where will that grant live? Because in some cases, as we've already talked about, we'll leverage resources of our partner entities as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's see, it seems like the discussion is about, we don't really know how much money we're talking about allocating for this process. So what we're talking about now is really what would the processes be, almost the blocking and tackling of doing that. My question is that a board activity, or is that a staff activity?
Well, first the question is...
Certainly the allocation of resources is a board activity, but going through and figuring out what does the application look like and what does that process look like, and looking at other organizations and what they've done, and
Sure. So in terms of the mechanics, I think, if I may, to answer your question, in my mind, if the board chooses to stand up this subcommittee, it'd be an opportunity for me and others to present various models to this subcommittee for their consideration of various pathways forward. The course of action to adopt literally the metrics for an application that could then be brought back to the full committee for their inputs before it's put out publicly. This is very similar to how a lot of the other grant programs across state government have been developed and pushed out most recently, that many in this room have helped to support to create the process of on CHIPS. So we've got plenty of models to present, but if we identify the right subcommittee of this board that is willing to roll up their sleeves and put the time and energy into understanding what those are, that's what we're discussing right now. If we create that subcommittee to present that information, come back to the full committee, hopefully get everyone's buy-in and a slap at the table to push out sooner rather than later, but of course incorporating all of these different thoughts along the way.
Is it a fund?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, the CHIPS is a much narrower target than we're talking about here, it seems to me. And if we want to do it that way and just make it a wide open thing, we don't need a strategy.
So that's just one model, and I'm not saying that we're limited to the approach, but this subcommittee can certainly play the not the gatekeeper, but the first thinkers of what that document could look like for the full board. If the full board would rather do it together in an open setting, we can have that conversation as well.
So, well, my first thought was that it's not really a funding review subcommittee, it's a grant review subcommittee, and it ought to play right under the strategic planning. You've got to have your strategic plan, and then part of that is the grant review discussion. Right?
Yeah, but it seems like it sounds like to me what we're talking about here is more the mechanics of how you would do it. It needs to be consistent with the strategic plan, and then there would be a discussion about how much, or maybe it's, in some cases we're going to say we're not going to do that now, right? So there might even be parts of that. But it's really, if we were going to do grants in these various areas, what would it look like? How would we review it? What infrastructure would we have to put in place to go do it? Then there's the alignment part, John, you're talking about.
Yeah, and if I might, I think part of what we're hoping to do right now is provide support to staff, which right now is Norman, but as we grow that, as for more rapid feedback and engagement, just ideas and that kind of that brainstorming and counsel, because if we wait to have these conversations just in open meetings, it may slow us down a little bit in beginning to address this. Obviously, as I mentioned, we're not going to get ahead of the strategic plan with this by any means, but the idea was to begin to look at best practices and to be that sounding board, a smaller group sounding board for Norman and staff as they come on board to discuss. Agreed that there's almost a couple phases here in my mind as I'm hearing you guys talk. First is standing up processes and procedures, but then we're going to get to a point where we need to address, since we, the commission, the board of directors, is responsible for selecting those where the grants go. That's a whole nother element, or I'll call it kind of a phase 2 of what that process looks like and how we do that, right? So that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, Gwen, I think obviously there's a tremendous interlocking aspect of this that has to be married up with the strategic plan initiative. I think defined processes by how we might go about the grant making process itself to be defined, but also then almost like a zero budget baseline, to Heather's point, where, based on the taxonomy of how they're building the strategic plan, we might create budget allocation for those kind of initiatives in support to include a reserve. We could probably start forming up what that generally looks like almost in parallel, but know that it has to be reflective, obviously, of our strategic plan, much different than what TSC is working on. But, we might want to expand maybe the scope into that kind of budget baselining process as well, or at least, allow the strategic planning subcommittee to do that. And I don't know how that works. Can subcommittees, how they cross-pollinate information? I think that's a pretty important part of this too, right?
Sure. And first, we need an application, though, to drive the allocation process.
So the other part of this too is timing, right? So we do know that we have to have at least a portion of the monies spent down by January. Does that sound about right? From what I understand.
That would be useful.
Mm-hmm. So again, why it makes it even more important probably to start with something like this, or at least working in parallel. So.
Other thoughts and comments?
And maybe this is a comment back to the strategic plan, were you putting targets in there for the allocation or not?
We have not put targets for allocation there, but there are some where, and I think one of the reasons is, we need to decide what we're not going to do in those strategies. But I think, there are some that are baseline funding for staff, things like enhancing the visibility of Texas. But if we wanted to do something, so I think it really requires what are we going to fund? And there may be buckets of money with respect to research where you could do one of 5 different things, and you go out with an RFP that says, it includes research enhancement grants and SBIR and STTR matching funds, PhD enhancement funds. So example, fund 4 years of tuition fees and research assistance stipend to any competitively awarded space-related research at a Texas public university to fund any Texas resident. So basically, you add a PhD on. What do we value that compared to? And then infrastructure. We've got 3 or 4 spaceports that get all rolled under this. I think all 4 of them have probably contacted all of us to say, okay, what's the process going to be to support these spaceports? What do we? We've got some buckets. What do we want to do?
I envision.
So do you feel like that's under this new subcommittee or the strategy? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Yeah.
I envisioned that the strategic planning subcommittee would have some proposed allocations. Ultimately, it's the board's job to do that. But I was thinking, I don't know, it's just my personal thought, that we came up with these goals and strategies. There's got to be some kind of, like Dr. Wilson is saying, some kind of editing process where we say, that's a great strategy. That'll be, we'll put a pin in it and save it for later. And we think you ought to fund these at some level, and then come forward ultimately to the board to go have discussions on that. I was envisioning that was a strategic planning product, but not as opposed to a funding committee. I don't know, Gwen, what were you thinking?
Well, and one of the things I've struggled a little bit as Norman and I have chatted about this is what do we call it? I've heard from another commission or director, project primers, or funding review or grant review committee, which means, could be different things. So I think we wanted what I know I was hoping to do today is say, do we need to go ahead and set up whatever we call it, a separate subcommittee, or do we wait a little bit? We just looking at timing and kind of work back schedules, thinking about, okay, like Norman said, we need an application. Of course, staff would draft it, but do we wait for the next board meeting for the whole board to review it? Or could we share it via email? I don't know, from a general counsel perspective, how we can do those things. What I'm kind of hearing is we may need to table this until maybe our next meeting, let everybody kind of think about it a bit more, but indeed, it's got to align with our strategic plan.
When we know that there are going to be 2 things because they're set out by the legislation. One is research, and the other one is infrastructure. Maybe if we say, all right, here's the kinds of things that would need to be there for an infrastructure grant or a process we want to come up with it. And the same with research. I don't have the capacity to assess the quality of a research grant proposal. But thinking about how we might do that, and that may be a reason to do matching grants rather than seed grants in the early years and before we get something set up and formalized. But we know those two things are required, like infrastructure and research. Maybe that's the place to start. Is what would those application processes look like, even if they need to be tweaked as we finalize the particular types.
But I think we need to keep in mind and leverage TARSEC, because they will have the ability to create review boards to make and rank order kind of from a technical merit perspective, aligning with the strategic plan. So kind of the way that I see it is the strategic plan should coincide with the funding. And from an infrastructure perspective, I think it is important to separate that into infrastructure needed in terms of that may be funded by the fund, which would be the thermal vacs or whatever that is, versus infrastructure that truly should be funded by other entities. That this fund was really not intended for. This fund was intended for space infrastructure, I believe, and the infrastructure beyond that, I think perhaps. So I think within that, maybe target funding, as well as maybe some thought at proportions.
I would put a caveat on that the spaceport funds were rolled in under this, and there was we have to take that into consideration for these communities where there should be skin on the game from the community, but also from the Space Commission.
Dr. Bonner has a comment.
Can we allow?
I can offer a quick comment if it's helpful. It may not be, but I think from a process standpoint, one thing would be to just establish if people or organizations or entities have a request or a proposal or an idea, you need to just establish how are they going to communicate that. So the process is really important of just setting up what's the mechanism going to be that you can receive these proposals or asks. And then along with that comes the timeline, because it's both the front end and the back end. In other words, you may not want to receive them yet because you're not ready, but then there also may be an end point where you say we're going to have to close our receiving of these ideas for now, because we've got to then process and meet our deadlines and get to work. So there's a big process issue of how you're going to receive not just requests for money or grants, but any other suggestion that people may have that would be very helpful to the commission. So establishing that process and figuring out what the window is going to be where you're going to open it up for people to communicate this and fill out the form and send it to you. And then maybe when the deadline is going to be, because it's always good for people to have, a time when their homework is due. Otherwise they won't all necessarily get it to you when you need it. I think those would be big things in terms of kind of my way of thinking. And then I would just remind y'all that it doesn't all have to be like grants. In other words, as you talked about shared infrastructure for facilities, that's more of an investment. And it may be an investment that the state makes and recoups from people utilizing that investment, that infrastructure. So it could look like, like an investment. It could look like a grant. It could even be a low interest rate loan. I mean, there's any number of ways it could be. It may not entirely just be, grants per se. It's kind of all of the above. But and there are other potential state resources that could be brought to bear other than just the capital that's been allocated to the commission. So to me, the big thing is to know how people are going to submit their ideas and their requests, and to know what that window is going to look like so that it works for you guys and the timeline that you're operating on. And just remind everybody, it's not just an ask for money, but it's an ask for ideas that transcend, the specific dollars. So those would be kind of my big picture thoughts. And on the spaceports, we want to support them, but I would suggest the spaceports engage just like everybody else and say, hey, this is, as a spaceport, what we're excited about doing. Here's our project, here's our proposal or our request. So it's not just cash that you give to the spaceports, but it's for a specific program or need or opportunity that the spaceports are outlining, which is going to vary from one to the other. Anyway.
All right, thank you. If it's okay, I have a proposal then. It sounds like there is some things we know that need to be done, and then the potential for a broader spectrum. What we're talking about today is discussing whether or not we should create a subcommittee to get off and work in this area, and establishing what its roles and responsibilities might be. I don't think we have to have all the roles and responsibilities. I think we can add to the roles and responsibilities in subsequent open meetings. So what I would suggest then perhaps we talked about two areas in particular that we were legislatively required to go off and work. Why don't we so the proposal then would be, let's create the subcommittee to go off and look at the process initially for these two areas. We'll, at the very next meeting, we can say, or the meeting after that, we can expand it to other areas. And it might be the same work, but hey, do the same thing for this area. That way we can define some roles and responsibilities for this subcommittee, get it going, and then add to those responsibilities in the future.
Kirk, I think that will work, but I think Representative Bonner just said something important, which is there may be people out there with ideas that even need to get incorporated into the strategic plan. So how does that committee also create, what is the portal and the window for getting your ideas in? And they could be infrastructure, they could be a research idea, they could also be a strategy idea. How do we open the aperture? And that seems to make sense to me too.
Okay, I do think so. First of all, I completely agree. I do think I viewed our subcommittee, the strategic planning subcommittee. Part of our job was to get ideas, but clearly, the three or the four of us won't be able to go scour the state for ideas. So I certainly having a web electronic front door would be awesome. So let's then maybe we talked about develop the process for looking at what the application might be, the process for accepting applications, the timeline, and perhaps even the review process for those two specific areas which you mentioned legislative, which were research proposals and infrastructure proposals. And then we tasked the subcommittee also with creating a front door for I'll call it none of the above. So ideas or thoughts beyond that, and just leave it at that for today. And then we could think about additional responsibilities or bucketizing that broad open door into additional categories for the future. So I know that's a lot. But just thoughts on that. If we just take the thought you just had, Dr. Wilson, and add it to, hey, creating this subcommittee to go off and looking at those two areas specifically we know we need as a way of priming the pump and getting started. So either we've confused everybody or we've depleted the energy here, or no one knows what the heck I just
So I
said.
think that
I got
makes
the
sense. We literally have 5 months to exercise that portion of the commission's roles and responsibilities. So, I think exploring what is that, setting it up, getting it moving, that puts us in a window to maybe execute then after the strategic plan kind of has more defined elements as to how much. So I think that's a good way
Sure.
to start.
Feels like we have some static friction. And if we can get the ball rolling, the rolling friction is less than the static friction, so.
There you go.
But we don't want
That's an
to,
engineer.
we
I
also
was
don't
about
want
to
to
say,
create
that's an
a,
engineer.
such a broad, yeah, I apologize for the non-engineers, but such a broad thing that we've now created a subcommittee with carte blanche. I don't know that that's a great idea either. So let me go see if I can succinctly summarize again. So create what are we calling it? We can call it a funding review subcommittee, but the action would be develop the application process, the screening or prioritization of those applications process, the timeline for accepting applications and when the windows would close and open for that. And in addition, the task of creating I'll call it a front door, a front door for ideas that don't fit in that bucket, including perhaps ideas for the strategic plan. Just the process for, the process for accepting those ideas, not what we would do with them, but just the process for accepting them. So that's I guess I would be looking for a motion, if there's no further discussion, then a motion to accept that, to create a subcommittee. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, would it help to call it something in funding process subcommittee? Like, we're talking process is what I hear us saying, and because we're not getting into funding review at this stage. So does that help?
Yes,
Usually,
because I was going to bring
I
that
think
up.
so.
I think we've gone beyond that name now, and so but I didn't have a thought about what that name should be.
Yes.
So I was reluctant to
From the
bring it up.
process engineer?
Funding process.
In the past,
Sounds
people just
good.
created a word that didn't mean anything and then said that's the
Or an
meaning.
acronym.
Or an
we
acronym.
can figure out.
Okay,
what we
that's
need.
great. So we can call it the proposal on the table would be call it a funding process committee,
Yeah.
subcommittee, I'm sorry,
Sir.
with those duties. Other discussion on it? John?
It was mentioned that we need some open meetings, website, whatever, for this. I wouldn't have it for this, but for the strategic plan subcommittee, right? And I would take that as an action somewhere, right? Because that's really important, I think, to either have the subcommittee have an open meetings just to take public input. That's been very effective in the past. I wouldn't do it just on websites. I would actually have a real, no kidding meeting where you meet with the public and take all their inputs. Because that's an important part of the transparency of this whole process.
So, John, if I could, we would give the strategic planning subcommittee the action to come forward with proposals about how to get public input? Is that, which might be the subcommittee doing that, but it might be.
I think it should be, yeah.
They're always for the subcommittee to engage the public. for sure.
Okay, good. Good.
But it might be engaging the board, the broader board, or Norman, or whomever else to go.
I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, great.
Get it out of the shadows.
Okay, can we make that a separate action
of course.
from this thing?
Yeah.
So we'll,
And I like your funding planning subcommittee proposal.
funding process
Funding process.
subcommittee. Did we
So
create a
write
bad
it
acronym?
down, right? Yeah.
Okay,
Planning the process.
great. All right, so if we agree, if there's no further discussion on creating the funding process subcommittee, we need a motion to create such a subcommittee with the duties that we outlined. And I guess we could task
Got the
Norman
notes.
and the chairperson to work on which board members might be part of said subcommittee.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there such a motion?
So moved.
All right, Brad moves, a second.
Second.
All in favor of creating the funding process planning committee, say aye.
Process subcommittee.
Thank you,
I
subcommittee.
wrote it down.
Very good,
So did
clearly I
corrected
didn't.
the-
All right, all in favor of creating that subcommittee, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Good discussion.
Awesome.
Very good.
Yeah, that was more energy in that discussion than I was expecting, but very good. I think it was a great discussion. Thank you all. Okay, let's see, administrative guidance to TARSEC. So we all know that the House Bill 3447 created Texas Aerospace Research and Space Economic Consortium, hereto forever referred to as TARSEC, and never all those words again. I guess there's an executive committee for TARSEC has been appointed, and its members are anxious to get moving. I don't really personally know the status of how that's going. Hopefully we will hear some of that. So we need to discuss the relationship between the commission and our commission and TARSEC. And obviously I think we all want a close relationship between the organizations and a clear understanding of the swim lanes and how we would work together, not only today but into the future. And we want to tap into their expertise, and we've already given Norman more actions he can deal with, so we could be great to task that entity as well. Let's see. So we would like to, I guess, authorize Norman to actively communicate with TARSEC Executive Committee, provide administrative guidance as they begin their meetings, and then I guess one action we need from TARSEC is a selection of a liaison. I think that was in the bill, as the commission is outlined in the legislation. So comments, first of all, let me see, Gwen, any comments from you on this? I know you did way more research on this than I did. Any comments or guidance from you?
Yeah, TARSEC is in need of some, I'll call it administrative, sometimes it might be referred to as guidance, but the opportunity to begin to meet, that has not happened to this point. So what we were proposing is that we authorize Norman to begin to actively communicate with the TARSEC Executive Committee, and with the intent or desire also, we want that ongoing close working relationship. We must have that with TARSEC for us to be fully successful, but also to look at, we need the liaison. That is in the legislation that they need to appoint, the Executive Committee of TARSEC needs to appoint a liaison to the Texas Space Commission, and ideally we'd like that person to begin to join our meetings appropriately now, sooner than later, as we're starting to move into those next phases of things we've been talking about today. So, Norman, you want to add to that? Because you and I, it's probably better in your words than mine today.
Yes, ma'am. Agree with all the above. I'll just be more clear in that I've literally heard from 7 out of the 9 on that executive committee in the last 2 weeks asking for the opportunity to help them meet. And so the purpose of this conversation with y'all is to take any further guidance on the logistics of that. It's pretty straightforward, but any further suggestions that you might have, I'd like to help make that happen sooner rather than later. And then in addition, I know that the rest of those members of TARSEC who were named in the bill as well are anxious to gather and have conversations and start to organize thoughts for fodder to you all moving forward as well. So that being said, I know that folks are scattered across the state, so it's probably going to be a virtual firsthand experience for at least the executive committee, but certainly aim to get folks together as often as possible and then have them self-organize for a liaison to join y'all at the next meeting. Hopefully we get that date set today, and hopefully that's in a few weeks in August, and then we can continue with the regular calendar cadence there and a flow of information very frequently. I know they're anxious, so I just wanted to share that that they have also reached out to me directly, and that would be my recommendation to y'all. Organize that executive committee, help them figure out how to get the rest of the group together, start funneling up information both this way and that way.
So the thing, still trying to understand what action we as a board, just to authorize you to go help.
Any specific suggestions, recommendations, guidance, otherwise that you want me to ensure is conveyed. Otherwise, I think I've got enough to work from, but certainly wanted to allow the open conversation now.
I have a question. So
Yes, ma'am.
they are also chartered with doing a strategic plan.
They are asked to make recommendations to the commission.
Yeah, I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
There's actually two separate strategic
Yeah.
plans.
Right.
There's a Space
Yeah.
Commission one, and then they have their own, which focuses on their two primary purposes, which are research.
And that
And
deliverable is to the commission or
It
to the
is
state?
to the state. Yeah, it is an entirely separate strategic plan.
Okay. And so their strategic plan is also due at the end of the year, is that correct?
Is there funding appropriated to the TARSEC
No.
specifically? So it might not have the same emphasis or same timeline because of the link to the funding.
Yeah, their exact deadline.
Is it appropriate that they could work in collaboration with our strategic planning subcommittee and almost create a fold-in as directed to amplify a particular area of strategic plan that we think needs to be worked, or do they have to remain separate? Because you know, I could see there to be really good synergy and an opportunity to fold them up under a broader state plan, strategic plan for this, but
So on the strategic plan piece, they do have a separate deliverable. There is not a deadline on that, given in statute. December 31st would be, I would guess, but it does not give them a timeline by which they have to have the strategic plan in place. And it's only, again, for their purposes, and they have two purposes laid out in statute. That doesn't mean they can't work, that we can't use that strategic plan information to inform ours as well, certainly. And it could even just be a full-on adoption or whatever the case, whatever it looks like. But they do have a separate deliverable strategic plan.
I would think it would go the other way. We would develop the strategic plan for the state, and then they would use that to develop their strategic plan for how they go fund their two.
So they're their own separate body, and
Right.
so, they can usually, certainly, I think they can take the direction and information, but they are the separate body, and so they.
It seems like I'm with you, John. At least I would inform them if we're going this way and they're going that way.
Right.
Absolutely.
And they don't, and frankly, they don't have any money. That's probably not going to be helpful.
No.
I don't think that would be likely, but and we're talking about doing 20 things, and they're kind of talking about these two. So I think you're right. It needs to be synergistic, and given where we are, it could be done in parallel, but not necessarily separate. You know what I mean? Like, if we're going to have drafts and things like that that are going to be getting public comment, we'd certainly want them to have that.
And just to be clear, what we're talking about here does not require a vote. The intent was to bring this awareness to the full board that, we feel Norman's ability to begin communicating with these executive committee members of TARSEC would be helpful so that they can begin to meet. When we were all appointed together in March, it was, I believe there was some question for TARSEC, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but there was some question about how and when they could meet. And some of the feedback I've gotten from a few of the members is we've been told to stand down. So I think what we're trying to do as a commission is to help them get started and utilize, now we have an executive director, and for Norman to do whatever he can to help them, navigate any processes or whatever reason they've been delayed a bit, to get past that so that they can begin to have regular meetings and self-govern. And by the way, identify a liaison to join the Texas Space Commission board meetings.
Sounds required.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need a additional energy to get them going, that would be great.
They're anxious, so let's not, it's a matter of, they have been asked to not move out, and again, not by us, but, and so it's really the ability to help them get going.
Great.
Awesome. We ought to ask them to move out. So I don't know how we express that, but gosh, I'm kind of disappointed personally that they're not. So
I'm going to be your voice this afternoon, if that's okay.
Yeah. There's some outstanding.
Do they,
it really is.
do they need anything? Oh, I'm sorry, John.
No, you got it.
Do they need anything from us beyond what you're currently proposing? I mean, do they need like the strategy discussion? I mean, is there something, do they need the funding discussion? I mean, is there something that we need to get done to help them?
I don't know the answer to that question yet. What they're hoping to do is to establish their cadence of meetings and get together. And Norman, what would you add to that? I mean, truly, that's my understanding is.
Yes, ma'am. I would say that what they need is to know your next meeting date so that they can be sure that they elect somebody beforehand and that person attends your next meeting, and that at their first meeting they organize a list of suggestions and comments that liaison would bring to this board for conversation so that their thoughts are coming this way. There's an opportunity for conversation to go back to them that way. In open forum, and then of course ongoing thinking can occur between the respective groups, and then if there's opportunities for events and other occasions to transpire in the meantime, I would expect that a lot of that creative thought would occur as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there's no specific vote or direction from the board, just cognizance, encouragement, and obviously, like you said, establishing the next meeting date, which we undoubtedly will do before we adjourn today.
Roger that.
Awesome. Thank you for helping them.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I think our next item on the let me see. I was going to go back one more thing about the subcommittee creation. We talked about the duties and stuff. I guess in the past we have communicated via Joseph, individual board members, maybe, hey, anyone who sees this as their calling, to help get ideas, and that Gwen would then, I guess tap people on the shoulder and see if they would serve. So should we do that via? We can do that via Norman or Joseph?
You're welcome to send it to me too, but I'll just forward it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we, Norman, can we ask you, if board members are seek that as their calling and would like to serve on that subcommittee, please reach out to Norman. If we don't get enough, we'll probably reach out to individuals.
Yes,
but,
sir.
Okay, great, thank you.
Chair and I are tagging up 3 times a week, so we'll be ready to have this conversation as soon as I hear from folks.
Awesome, I just dropped the ball on that particular element of it,
Yes,
so
sir.
I wanted to circle back. Okay, I guess we need to convene into an executive session to discuss the hiring of a compliance officer. So do we need to? We just pause this meeting. Tell people from the public that we'll reconvene. We'll announce when we're going to reconvene. I'm not exactly sure how long the executive session is going to occur.
That's right, and so just as a note, this executive session will be held under section 551.074 of the government code, which allows us to go into a closed executive session to discuss personnel matters. That's the primary piece we need to do.
Okay, we're going to reconvene the public meeting at 12:46 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Thank you again for joining. We concluded our executive session. I think out of the executive session, we just have a request for the staff to continue with the HR activities in preparation for the board extending an offer, voting and extending an offer to a chief compliance officer. So if we can get the staff to take that action, and we'll talk about that more in the coming meetings. I think the last action that we have today is to establish a future meeting date. So probably the hardest part of our meeting is to figure out the next time we're gonna meet. So, I think there is a desire to have another meeting as quickly as possible, which is, I think you said the 25th is the soonest we could have a meeting and comply with the posting of the public meeting. So perhaps board members could check their calendars as close to the 25th or after for our next meeting, and see what you think.
Maybe the afternoon of the 25th or even the 26th myself.
Same with me.
Yeah, it would have to be 3 p.m. or later on the 25th. Me.
Yeah, just schedule it. Figured it out. The 26th is really a disaster for me, so I think we're gonna have an agency review on that day. So afternoon the 25th.
That's fine.
I will be at the Farnborough Air Show, but if I'm the only one that, and I can try to dial in, but if I'm the only one not there, then I
I
understand.
don't think that's her at all.
No, although the afternoon on the 25th is going to be a tad unpleasant, but
Yeah, it'll be a little late for me, but again, if I'm the only one, there's a quorum, so.
For me,
And
to be in Austin in person, I can do the morning of the 25th or the 26th. I know that's not good for you, John. I'm flexible except from 2 to 3 p.m. on that day.
the 26th would be much easier for me too, but I'm flexible.
3 o'clock on the 25th. I don't know if that-
Heather, Kathy.
3 o'clock on the 25th is probably the best for me, but let
Did you
me
say-
know.
Gwen, I'm sorry, did you say you couldn't be in Austin on the 25th? Is that right?
Yeah, that's what.
I am supposed to be in DC for an event the evening of the 25th. So ideally, the morning of the 25th, I could fly from Austin to DC. But, and so Friday is actually better for me. I can look at getting out of that trip, but I'll have to work on it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Kathy, leaders, if could you support a meeting in the afternoon of the 25th in Austin?
I could.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I don't want to do this.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you're doing so good. I said.
Well, I think everyone's looked at their calendar. What's the consensus? The afternoon of the 25th, it sounded like.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe 6 availabilities at that time.
Okay.
Dr. Wilson?
It'll be tough for me, but my schedule is always a mess. So if you've got a quorum,
Is Saturday an option? It is for me. I mean, I work most Saturdays anyway, right? I mean, it'll be a pretty short meeting, we think, on the 25th. Right?
you get a quorum.
It's not a problem for me. So don't know. I also don't want to pressure people into that either. But
It's not a constraint. It's an option. But I think I heard Dr. Wilson say if there's enough to proceed with Thursday, 25th at 3 p.m.
Okay.
But, okay.
Do we have a quorum for them?
I've tracked 6 so far, yes, ma'am,
without counting Evan.
without counting Evan and with a couple of maybes.
Okay, great. All right, then let's propose our next meeting. So Gwen, if you're okay with that,
Yeah.
we would propose the next on the 25th, 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time, with an agenda to be posted very soon.
Yeah, and Kathy, you and I can sync up offline whether I can be there or not, or what your schedule looks like, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Okay, great.
Let's see, any other, I don't have any closing comments. Any closing comments, Gwen, that you'd like to make?
I appreciate you pinch hitting at the request this morning at 6:30 a.m. So thank you for that, Kirk. And I do feel like we covered a lot of ground today. So thank you all. And also, Norman, welcome aboard. May our next 11 days together be as productive. So, and then the 11 after that as well. So.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Do we want to do an action review? We took a bunch, I think.
I think we do. Do we have to, I was thinking we'd maybe do that outside.
Okay.
Outside this, because we might need a little help with from our electronic friend as well.
Thanks.
So I guess, Norman, I'll be happy to compare my notes with you and then we can compare with the digital record. That's all.
And then we'll work on it.
And we could post it, John, in a book. We'll post it to make sure we capture those.
Other than that, you just need to call for an adjournment and call the time.
Okay, if there's no other comments today, we will adjourn. Thank you all at 12:53 p.m. Central. So thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thank you.